Welcome back to Icon 2016, coming to you live from Gallagher Convention Center in Midrand. For the first time in South African history, a pop culture convention streaming the panels live to a worldwide audience, powered by always-on Wi-Fi, super fast Wi-Fi when you need it. This particular panel, before we get to these details, two slight points. One, viewers of our previous panel in relation to introduction to podcasting might have noticed the severe absence of one Rico Chakral. Rico is the artist behind Madam Eve, and he was scheduled to do a panel previously. However, Rico came down ill overnight. We wish him all the best. He sadly passes through his apologies for not being here. However, we will have Rico, we've already spoken, we will have Rico and the Madam Eve team lined up for an amazing 2017 event. This particular panel, we're going to have a special guest come on stage before we start. Sophie is going to be bringing up Star, and Star's going to take a little bit of a seat on one of my shoulders here. There we go. Thank you very much.
Wow, cool.
Okay. Now, Star's just going to sit. No, Star, it's okay. She's coming back. It's all right. Star is one of our guests from Laurie Park Zoo. Icon has long supported Laurie Park Zoo. You can get more details at lauriepark.co.za. That's L-O-R-Y, park.co.za. Laurie Park is a sanctuary and a company that does an amazing array of conservation projects, specifically around endangered species. Now, Star here is one of their ambassador animals, and Laurie Park actually has a stand here at Icon this year, so you can actually go over and get photos taken with Star. It's quite an experience. So, a star could actually join me for the entire convention, but I also have two other stars. See what I did there, guys?
It's called a Segway.
Oh, I believe it's a Segway. Is that the actual
Not the one you
industry?
ride.
Not the one you want? Yeah, let's not talk about those. We're here talking about the rise of speculative fiction in today's society. And with me, we have Fred Strydom, South African author. He's looking very pensive at the moment. Recently published The Raft, which we're quite excited to get our hands on in South Africa. Fred, is it actually in South Africa at the moment?
Yeah, it's been an essay since last year, April.
Last year, April?
And it was released
Well, that's really embarrassing from my side, isn't it?
And it was released in the States at the beginning of May.
That's right. That was what I was following up. It was the release of
That's the one.
So it's actually got the US release, so it is available locally, but it was released in the United States in May. And we also have another guy, Raymond, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Raymond Feist.
I think so.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I just moved because somebody missed the lights around and your shadow kept going.
Okay, so I'm going to move over to this point,
Yes,
and
so-
Star's quite happy.
Yes, it's definitely creative lighting.
Creative writing.
No, lighting.
Oh, creative lighting. And you've written a couple of things, right?
That's allegedly, yes.
What would people know you most for?
Probably not paying my rent on time. But if you're talking about books, probably magician.
Probably magician.
Probably magician.
I think a fair few people here would actually know about that. So, gentlemen, I'm going to throw to you the term speculative fiction. I believe was first attributed to Heinlein in the early 40s.
That particular term, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about is the idea that it's a loose extension title for anything that covers really science fiction, fantasy, horror, anything that stretches the bounds of normality, I guess.
Sure.
Would that be accurate?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Let's do that.
Why not? I think it's a genre, right, or a title that's constantly changing. You got guys like David Mitchell coming out and kind of redefining what it means to rewrite the laws of reality. And I think speculative fiction.
What has Dave Mitchell done?
David Mitchell is the author of Cloud Atlas and the Bone Clocks and Slade House and whatnot. So you got guys like him coming in, and they're just kind of, it's cross-pollination, and he's playing with time, and he's playing with kind of traditional non-speculative tropes, and then merging it with speculative tropes. So so it's constantly changing, but it's that umbrella, just rewriting the rules of reality.
Well, that's a very good general umbrella. I'm the official geezer here, so I'm going to go back a few years historically. You go all back to like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells for like the original. People claim that what we would call speculative fiction began with Mary Shelley.
With Frankenstein.
A bunch of people got drunk one night and made a bet.
Yeah.
And she was the only one a year later came back with an actual book. But beyond that, a large part of what we talk about is labels, and a large part of those labels have to do with marketing. So never confuse genre with category. Genre is literature, and category is publishing. When I was a kid, America kind of led the way because we basically were putting out more movies that people were watching overseas than anybody else. I remember when Forbidden Planet came out.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I don't see the wires and the guy with the sound mic's shadow on the back wall and all the things that I'm used to seeing in science fiction. Wow, somebody actually spent some money on this bad boy.
Right.
And it was, like the first serious science fiction film. Well, that got shown all over the world. And Robert Heinlein got read all over the world. And A. Merritt got read all over the world. And I'm going back. And, H. Rider Haggard got read all over the world. What happened was the literature was always there in one form or another, but more and more people discovered it. Now, when I was a youngster, and I would run down to the local pharmacy to go to the book spinner and see if there was new science fiction, and back then that was Ace Doubles and Valentine Science Fiction, there was one category in the big bookstores, science fiction. And what science fiction was actually fantasy science fiction and horror. Because back then horror was still considered a category. I mean, a subcategory. Then one day, you'd walk in the bookstore and see science fiction, fantasy, and horror, because this guy, J.R.R. Tolkien, just started selling books all over every campus on the English-speaking planet. And they went, oh, we better, So what was the fantasy part? It was Tolkien and people who write stuff like him. And that, the Worms Overburrow, and then, anything, they were looking for anything they could call fantasy and publish. And then one day I walked into the store and it said, science fiction and fantasy. And over here was a whole category of horror. Well, horror was publishing code for Stephen King and guys who write stuff like him.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are confusing labels.
Yeah.
And I think he's right in the sense that it's all about wonder. It's all about what if. It's all about changing the rules of reality. It's all about saying, well, what if we took a lot of dead people parts and sewed them together and shot lightning through them, all the way up to, the really remarkable stuff that people are writing about superstring theory and black holes and alien intelligence. So I don't think it's risen. I think it's always been around. I just think more and more people are discovering it, and as a result, more and more people are writing it.
Yeah. So if we're using the definition of the term speculative fiction, it actually applies all the way back to H.G. Wells, etc., because it is an umbrella term. It's now just becoming more popularly embraced, I guess. Would that be correct to say?
There's some books. I remember one of the first adult books I read as a kid was Lord of the Flies, right, which was a huge influence on me. And when it got to the point of the pig's head, you know what I mean?
On the point.
Sorry, spoilers, Lord of the Flies spoilers.
So yeah, it's that was horror. Do you know? That was a horror trope, and it just kind of hit me. And there was that little seed, like, oh, you can do that, right? You could just have like this kind of by the numbers, not by the numbers, but kind of linear story with a bunch of kids, and then suddenly you just toss in a horror trope, and it just kind of elevated the entire book to like another level. And I think the best speculative fiction the best kind of speculative fiction kind of understands the layers of using these tropes to kind of elevate fiction, as opposed to kind of, doing it just for the sake of it.
Right. Raymond, would you say that from the increased adoption, that it's okay to actually say, oh, well, I read science fiction, I read fantasy. If you were to go back, say, even in the 80s, and somebody wanting to watch a show about dragons and an Iron Throne and all of these things, then you're kind of getting pushed to the side. It's like, yeah, no, that's fantasy stuff, that's for kids. Why would there now be a shift these days where it's the biggest show on television around the world? Money. Okay.
Look, I'll tell you, I grew up in the business. My dad was a producer, writer, director. He had an obscure little show, I don't know if you heard about it down here, called Peyton Place, which was the first prime time.
I think some people may have heard of it.
Yeah, older generation have. Yeah, it was Dallas before there was a Dallas. dynasty before there was a dynasty. It was based on the Grace Metalius book of the same name, and it was on 3 nights a week, prime time, ABC, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. The year my dad died, it was number 1, number 2, and number 4 in the Nielsen ratings.
Wow.
Insane numbers, 30 share, 33% viewership, just, gigantic hit for ABC. You don't see a lot of the prime time, adult soap operas, why they came and went. And I suspect there maybe, fantasy will come and went. Or, I mean,
yeah.
Viacom is trying a really interesting experiment with the new Star Trek TV show. It's like, hey, psst, kid, the first one's free. They're going to broadcast the very first episode of the new Star Trek TV show over the air, CBS network in America. After that, you got to pay the fee to get to CBS All Access. We'll see how that works out. I suspect, like Game of Thrones, that show will be one of the most pirated, torrented show on the internet. I mean, if I've seen it, I don't get that culture because I get paid for royalties, therefore I don't pirate. But I've seen people talk about how, like 20 seconds after the episode ends, for all of you people who don't have HBO, this torrent site will now give you, Game of Thrones.
Would it be fair to say that speculative fiction being so broad, that there's so much in there, that there's so much that traditional mainstream wouldn't have seen before, that when it starts to, we need something new now. We need new areas to tap because the other stuff was getting old?
Well, if you don't mind me jumping back in on that, because I was going to say, what I was going to say was that, one, you can make money with it now. 2, CGI makes it possible to do Game of Thrones. You could not have done Game of Thrones even 10 years ago. You certainly couldn't have done it 20 years ago. It would have been, look at Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who because it has a very strict set of belief requirements, which is basically shut off your higher brain function and go with it. And so you see some of the, like, look at the Zygons today and when they were introduced like 30 years ago, the rubber suit versus the really good CGI. But it's essentially the same creature. And back in the 60s, it was like squint your eyes a little bit, make everything fuzzy and nice.
What, the whole Star Trek funny nose type thing?
It's like if you watched all the Trek, a friend of mine is David Gerrold, the guy who wrote the original Trouble with Tribbles. And they did a sequel to that called Trials and Tribulations for Deep Space Nine. And one of the wars that went on when when the movie started, Star Trek, the motionless picture, when suddenly the Klingons were speaking in an alien language and had all the makeup and the hair, and suddenly, fandom being what fandom is, God help us all, went off on the smooth forehead versus the bumpy forehead Klingons, which they made a joke out of in Enterprise when the smooth-headed Klingon showed up. But in Trials and Tribulation, there's this wonderful scene where they're going back in time to witness this stuff, and Worf is there, and they walk into the canteen just as the fight is about to break out between Scotty and the Klingons and all that. And one of the, I think Bashir says, "Those are Klingons?" And Worf just says, "This is something we never talk about." Because it's like we didn't have a budget back then. We didn't have money. So that's a big part of it, is the technology has now arrived, both in makeup and costuming and in CGI, that they can do things that were impossible. So that's a big part of it. The other part of it is that we were talking a little bit about horror, and what I realized is that Stephen King rests upon H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft rests upon Edgar Allan Poe. If you go from The Mask of the Red Death to Rats in the Walls to it, it's like there is this constant exploration of why are we scared of certain things and why is fear a necessary component of who we are. I did a show with Clive Barker once where we talked about that, and I said it's like a safe roller coaster. It's like a roller coaster ride. There's a hell of a lot of stress in a roller coaster ride, but you enjoy it. It's positive stress. It's like, wow, let's do that again. So I think what we're talking about is we want to explore these themes. We want to talk about these tropes. We want to go back again and see what the Rats on the Walls was all about, or the Mask of the Red Death.
I think. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just going back to the Game of Thrones, the popularity and everything. When it was originally pitched to HBO, it was pitched as The Sopranos meets
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. And everyone went, oh, okay, we get that.
We understand those two concepts.
We understand it. And what it did is, I mean, with Game of Thrones, it introduced a whole new kind of mainstream audience because the dragons came in really late. I mean, the CGI stuff came in late. And what they did is they said, this is a character drama, right? So we're going to focus on this being a real in-depth character drama. And when you and I think that was one of the entry points for the mainstream audience into the Game of Thrones universe. If there were just a whole bunch of dragons in episode 1, maybe it would have kind of polarized people.
Sure.
But it kind of brought them in.
Right.
And George R. Martin said himself, he said, I mean, he used to write for Beauty and the Beast, right? And his whole thing was, the studio execs would say, all right, so you can't have someone slit someone's throat, as I say that, on camera, but you can have a vehicle crash and explode with a whole bunch of people die. And he went, well, that's a very traumatic thing. Like, why is it okay to have a car explode full of people, but if you have a close-up of somebody slitting their throats, that's something you can't show.
Yeah.
And that kind of got the seed starting in his mind about what constitutes kind of accepted mainstream violence and depiction,
right.
and then kind of evolved. I mean, we know that Tolkien is very literally black and white. It's good guys, bad guys. Good guys hardly die.
And
bad guys die by the droves, even though they're
and Michael
massive
Moorcock's at the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he knew that. So D.B. Weiss and David Benioff and in the show and George R. Martin, they knew that the way to kind of coach people into this and to kind of create a new legion of kind of fantasy fans was to make it universally kind of humanized and layered, and I think that's an interesting kind of aspect in which speculative fiction kind of like I said is used to elevate kind of traditional drama tropes and structures.
There's also an interesting process by which I've known George for 30 years, and the first book of his I read was Armageddon Rag, and I heartily endorse it. It's a wonderful book about a haunted rock and roll band, and it's great.
A haunted rock and roll band.
Haunted rock and roll band. Yeah,
awesome.
It's just a terrific novel. I met George and had him sign up for me in '84. That's how long I've known George Martin. And this is going to sound really cheesy to put it this way, but one of the things that happened, first of all, I went to HBO and then a lot of overseas money and guaranteed markets so that they could finance what they wanted to finance. But they did some things that were very clearly money, Hollywood, behind the scenes oriented. They signed Sean Bean for 1 season, and I'm serious. It's like amazing actors there, but there was not a household name and it's not even a household name until they brought Charles Dance aboard. Very, very established, and Jonathan Pryce. These are guys who are pros. They are absolute, guaranteed, give you every inch of talent they've got for the part, but they're not stars. There was no star power attached to that show, but they came out with amazing young actors that we've never heard about. And this is going to sound kind of glib, but I mean it's they said, we're going to give you people you really love. We're going to cut off Sean Bean's head at the end of the first season.
Spoilers. Sorry.
Yeah. And you're going to like it. I mean, you're not going to like it, but you're going to like it because it works dramatically like crazy. We're going to put a lot of people you like in jeopardy, so you really, how are they going to get out of this? And we're going to make Emilia Clarke take her clothes off a lot. And actually, that's not so much a salacious thing as it's a real amazing manipulation of the viewer for about you understand the difference between the word nude and the word naked. Nude means you don't have any clothes on. Naked means you're vulnerable. You're exposed. You have no protection. So they made Emilia Clarke naked a lot. And she was early on one of the most sympathetic characters there. So 2 things happen. One, first of all, you hate her brother within 30 seconds. And when he gets the helmet treatment, you're going, yeah. But you are so emotionally invested in certain characters, and she's one of them. Daenerys Stormborn is a character that she goes out and does really horrible things, and you're going, yeah, you go, girl. So it's a masterful manipulation of the audience. because that's what we want as an audience. We want to be manipulated, but we want to be manipulated in an intelligent way, in a way that makes us feel like we've got to go somewhere with people. And that's why it's a great show.
Yeah. There are a couple of points that have come up there that I want to try and tie together and maybe give you guys a throwback to a conversation you had earlier.
Sure.
So the idea of if the special effects and the abilities were around earlier, then these things would have been made and exposed to a mainstream audience, and if they were successful, then obviously it would have grown. Let's talk David Lynch's Dune.
They mentioned we were talking about Dune.
Oh, were you guys talking about it earlier? I didn't know.
We were.
Right. So we have Dune, which was written in the 50s, and it is a multi-million-time bestseller. It's an amazing book. It's fantastic. You now have a movie studio trying to take that and adapt it to the big screen.
Several times, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of times. So it didn't quite strike a chord. Now, what I was thinking when you were mentioning that, well, if we had those sorts of technologies and that sort of sci-fi, Star Wars is an example. Nobody's seen anything like this before, hence its popularity, even in a time where reading comics and science fiction, that's kind of for babies, that sort of thing.
I mean, that's the thing. We had seen that before, and so did George Lucas. You know, I grew up in, the late 50s, the late 40s, early 50s. You know, I remember Saturday morning getting up in this little black and white Emerson 13-inch television that was in this big honking cabinet because it had all these tubes in it. And you got horrible reception unless you were in a certain part of the LA area. I remember watching Flash Gordon,
right.
Buster, Larry Buster
Yes.
Crabbe.
Yeah.
I remember watching Larry Buster Crabbe also do Buck Rogers. I remember Commander Cody and the Lost Planet Airmen. But that was all pulp fiction turned into weekly serial by the studios, where you got 13 chapters because they wanted your ass back in the theater 13 weeks in a row. And I used to see those things at the Saturday matinees when I was a kid in the 50s. So did George Lucas. But what he did was he took it to a whole new level. And I worked at Fox for a while, and I'll tell you, there were people at Fox who had no idea what this guy was doing. They didn't have a clue. And the way in which Star Wars George was very successful with a movie called American Graffiti, which that was my childhood. That was me in high school graduating. I wasn't up in the Central Valley. I was in the San Fernando Valley, but cruising the boulevard, going to the drive-in, I knew those people. I didn't know those people, but I knew people just like them. Very successful. He took all his profits and his future earnings and told 20th Century Fox he would leverage that into doing Star Wars. Fox didn't want to do Star Wars. There's nobody who's ever been fired for saying no most of the time in Hollywood. Let me tell you one story about why George Lucas turned into one of the most insanely wealthy movie producers in the world. They didn't want to do Star Wars. They said, fine, this movie's going to go out and bomb big time. And little did they suspect. I went to the very first showing in San Diego, walked right up to the box office, like 10 minutes before the movie went, and bought a ticket. The audience was maybe 1/3 full. Told my friends about it. We went back to see it the next night, lines around the block. That's how the word of mouth got it. Some lawyer at Fox forgot to put one little paragraph in the contract they had with Lucas. Lucas retained all of the marketing rights to ancillaries.
Nice.
So all the Hasbro toys, all the comic books, all the coloring books, all the T-shirts.
He got to license the lot.
Lucas owned all of it. If you see a one-sheet for the very first 77 release at the bottom, it says copyright 20th Century Fox Limited. 20th Century Fox Films Incorporated. If you go back and see the re-release, it says copyright Lucasfilm Limited. Fox gave him back the copyright to Star Wars. They gave him total ownership in exchange for 20% of the marketing rights and distribution rights for the next two movies. That's how much money that movie was making.
And so Fox was willing to do that just for 20% of that slice.
20% of all that's to come in the future, yes. Which it was a wise decision from their part. But this is getting back to something we're talking about. This stuff makes money now. That's why people want to do it on the bigger stage. I would love to see the perfect version of Dune. getting back to that,
Sure.
there are things about the David Lynch version I like. There are things about the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries I like, but nobody's ever done it perfectly.
Sure. And Jodorowsky had his version, which we were talking about, which was
Confused.
12-hour, 18-hour long version where I don't think he finished the book. I just think he kind of read the back and then ran with it.
And I'm just going to take off from here.
Yeah.
There's a documentary out about it, which
Yeah.
just is, woo.
Yeah.
It's like the guy wanted to turn Dune into Berlin Alexanderplatz. He wanted to be Fassbinder, and the fact is, no. There's a certain point at which, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong because people are binge watching things now.
Yeah.
But I thought, no. Your entertainment shouldn't become an endurance contest.
Well, I'd like to throw to both of you there. We've got the Netflix model of we're now going to release the entire season now, and we'll spend the next 11 months building up for next year. We'll keep developing it. We know where we're going to go.
Yeah.
You talked the serialization of 13 weeks every Saturday morning.
It worked like crazy for a show called House of Cards in the States, with
Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey. I've discovered where I'm not a good audience for that. I watched like the first half of the first season, and I watched like the first 3 episodes of Daredevil, and then I get doing other stuff, and I don't go back, and it's a really weird reason, I think.
Yeah.
I have a DVR and a satellite, so I'm on DirecTV, so I just set it up, so it just records all the stuff I want to see, and I go okay, and I just menu, boom, boom, I'll watch this, and then I watch stuff with my kid. For some reason, and this is going to sound so lame, it's almost like, oh yeah, I got to switch out of the receiver over to the internet, and then I got to go get Netflix, and I don't like their interface very much. I mean, really stupid reasons. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that one of the tricks on good marketing this stuff is the path of least resistance. I also don't watch stuff on my computer. I've got, my television in my bedroom will get Netflix. So that's where I have to be if I want to watch the next Daredevil. I guess the other thing I'm kind of fumbling towards is there's so much stuff on now.
Yeah.
I have people come to me and say, hey, did you see so-and-so? Like, I have never seen an episode of The Walking Dead. My daughter hates it. My son loves it. My ex-wife, my son, absolutely loved Breaking Bad. I've never seen an episode. I was a little frightened there for a couple of weeks.
I'll throw to Fred's point, and then I'm going to come back on something you said. Fred?
No, so there is a lot of money, but I mean, like the music industry, it's become a survival of the fittest kind of model. So it's like if it's talked about, if there's buzz, people will watch it, and if there isn't, when I was a kid, you'd watch something on a Monday night at 9, come to school, and you'd talk about the episode with the entire school, right? So that can't happen anymore, and that entire culture of kind of streamlined, structured content getting fed to you, essentially creating a generation and saying we are 90s kids, we are 80s, we are 70s kids.
But you just touched on something I hadn't even thought of. You can't talk about the water cooler now. Spoilers.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people like I have a mailing list which is dwindling as the internet has exploded. But people will say, spoilers, and then somebody else will say, look, the book's been out for 28 years.
Yeah.
And then I go, yeah, but that 12-year-old kid just read it yesterday for the first time.
Actually, there's during our first interview with Raymond for the podcast, for the Release the Gig podcast, I talked to him about spoilers. And I'd actually had a conversation in the car with some people that I'd seen the movie that night, and I started talking about the movie. Not details of the movie, but the general experience. And someone in the car turned at me viciously and said, say spoilers first.
Yeah.
I said, listen. And it got into a conversation of when is the moratorium for spoilers? Now, I brought this point up with Raymond when we first started. It's like, but Magician, it was released in '82. Sure, I can talk about Pug. Sure, I can talk about Aretha and these things that happen. And Raymond's salient point was around his new markets. And I'm just going to let the man tell you.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sitting over there signing books. And by the way, you people were great. Really enjoy talking to you.
All right, round of applause for the people.
Yeah, give yourself a round of applause. Well, not you so much. Anyway, seriously, and they love to talk about stuff. But I'm sitting there looking at some gentleman in his 40s or whatever who, read it when he was 12, and then right next to him is his son who is maybe 16 and just starting, and I realized we're learning something about mass media that isn't obvious, or wasn't obvious to me. I have a degree in marketing, but it was mass media and public opinion, and I was a salesman. I did a bunch of stuff. But you're right, it was when I was a kid. Oh, did you watch Bonanza last night? Because if you ever have a chance to see that episode again, it's going to be maybe this summer during reruns.
Yeah.
There were no on-demand. There were no VCRs. There were no computer lines. It was immediate here and now experience. Oh no, I had to go to Granny's for dinner and I couldn't watch it. Well, you want me to tell you about it? Yeah, what happened to Little Joe and Hoss? And that's completely changed. It's like ancient history.
When did the seeing of a TV show or seeing of a movie stop being an event?
Yeah.
That this is happening at this point, and you better be in front of your television. And then
Sports is it. Unless you want to go home alone and go like this all the way home and not find out who won the championship game and then watch it on delay, I would say sports is sports and political debate, I guess. But even political debate you can watch later. But sports, you want to see that championship game now. But other than that, I can't think of anything.
But it's interesting because take The Sixth Sense, right?
Yeah.
The Sixth Sense was a massive hit because there was a kind of unspoken agreement among anyone who watched it that I'm not going to say the only 4 words you need to say to ruin the entire film, which is Bruce Willis is dead.
Oh, sorry for
right,
anybody who hasn't seen it.
See?
Sorry.
Oh, he did it.
Exactly. But
Fred, we just talked about
But
this.
the other thing is, there's this whole movement on the internet that says, go for it. Spoil away, right?
Actually, there's one movie that I'm going to throw to you. I'm not going to say it because even now, it doesn't get done, and that's The Crying Game.
Yeah, sure.
There is a scene in
That
The
was
Crying
the first
Game.
one. That was
Yeah.
Just tell them all.
No, there is no, I'm not spoiling that for anybody. There is a scene in The Crying Game.
I'll
I
go
think it's
this
about
far and
1
say
hour,
there's an
24 minutes in.
Aerosmith song that touches on the subject.
Yeah, there's a scene in the movie around about the 1 hour, 24-minute mark, and people would just tell you, just go watch it. Why? What happens?
Just
You
watch
need to go watch it because it was just an unexpected turn that nobody expected. And so Sixth Sense kind of built into that.
Yeah, and Sixth Sense pulled in. Sixth Sense was also came at a time when the internet was in its infancy.
Usual
and things
Suspects?
Like that.
Would you say Usual Suspects?
As well. All those kind of 90s, just on the cusp of when internet kind of hit mainstream.
There's this cadre of films, not many of them, but I love them because you can only see it for the first time once.
Yeah.
And the second time you watch it, it's an entirely different film. Crash, A Fight Club,
Wow, yeah.
The Usual Suspects,
Yeah.
Crying Game, they're all that way. It's like once you get the MacGuffin, as Hitchcock used to call it, you go, wow. And then the second time you watch it, you know what the MacGuffin is, and you just sit there going, wow.
This is what I missed.
Yeah.
These are all the points.
Yeah, and that's when because that's what I meant when I said there's this group on the internet, this kind of small movement that says, let spoilers. Spoilers are going to be spoilers. The thing is, the thing with watching Game of Thrones now or watching anything is that there's so much information around a single episode. I mean, when you listen, like the last episode of Game of Thrones, which I won't spoil. When you see...
If you were here at yesterday's Walking Dead...
Next
Friday's
I'll tell
Walking
you
Dead
all
panel,
about
yeah.
it. So, but there's just, it's like sports commentary. There's full panels and people discussing the intricacies of Sansa and this and that and whatever, and everybody's debating and everyone's arguing to the point that the appreciation of the content has kind of evolved as well. So where once it was that kind of personal... okay, I'm going to be surprised and follow the plot. It's like there's this whole new realm of appreciation, which is, I've seen it, now I want to delve into the minutiae of what's been going on. Go back, dissect, cut up in little pieces, form my own opinion about whether that ending works with the rest of it, with clip here, clip there, clip wherever. And there's this new culture towards, which is you can say it's a good or a bad thing, it doesn't matter. but there's this new thing towards that is the future of entertainment, that fully interactive, full engagement from the viewer.
I'm going to ask then, there's an old line about explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. At the end of it, you understand how both works, but they're dead.
Yeah. Well, we have a saying in politics and debate in a lot of areas, if you're explaining, you're losing.
Right.
One of the things about the Game of Thrones phenomena is that, this thing Fred just talked about with the, dissecting and talking, and it's a very communal, tribal approach to a subject. It's a way to have a sense of community. And I think that the lack of that, let's go talk around the water cooler Monday morning, TV was an event, is substituted by, let's all get together and drink tea and talk about it. Or
right, so there's migration in that pattern.
Right, yeah, but it's the need to share the experience. It's very human, very, very human. I got a writer, of acquaintance of mine who just went off on, I got a writer's board that I hang out on, science fiction writers. And he won't be named, but he went off about, how...
Just use his handle.
Huh?
Just use the handle.
No, I'm not going to say, what his name is. But he went off about, what a horrible character Sansa was now, because when she did the thing she did in the last episode at the very end that turned the thing around. And, Anyway, blah, 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 blah.
Well done. Well done.
But how, and I'm going, have you been watching this show? There's not a whole lot of guys you want speaking at the Rotary Club meeting among the cast. There's not nobility is a relative term in that universe. My son has this amazing ability to just see through stuff and immediately prioritize what's important to know and what's just there to make noise and get in your way. I had dinner with my publisher last year, and my publisher publishes George as well. And as I said, I've known George for a very long time. So my son said, hey, when you go have dinner with Jane, I figured out the ending of the book. The ending of the whole series. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah. He said, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen because. I went, okay. I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'll go ask Jane. So I'm having dinner with Jane Johnson, HarperCollins publisher, my publisher, George's publisher. And I said, hey, by the way, James, my son, James said this, because of that. And she just went. So my son knows how it's going to end. George may know how it's going to end. Yeah. All the hints are there. My son explained it to me after I got back from London. I went, oh, okay. By the way, knowing what the ending is for me has not done a damn thing.
Yeah.
To change my interest.
There is a recent reports have come out that spoilers can aid and enhance the experience because it raises expectations.
I think I was lucky because my son told me what was going on just, like 30 seconds before I might have figured it out. So I don't feel like anything was ruined for me. But it does give you one different perspective, I think, that's really useful. Well, not useful, but it's different. We're getting back to Fight Club and Soap, Crash and all the rest of it, which is, I'm now looking for slightly different things than I was before. I'm looking for the little tells, poker term, that show me this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and it's kind of fun. Because now we know that it's only going for X number of episodes, and George hasn't written the last book yet, which I think if he's a really evil bastard, he'll write an entirely different book and ending than what we saw on television.
Yeah. And, for me, the most interesting stuff about shows like Game of Thrones is having a debate about whether the High Sparrow deserves all the hate that he gets. It's somebody raised the point and said, we hate the High Sparrow as a character, but in a very anachronistic way, because we have strong contemporary views on religious extremism. Mm-hmm. But if you were an ordinary person living in that time on the streets, who would you want in charge? The genocidal maniacs who are killing people by the droves, or the dirty man who's trying to temper them, right? It's so that debate about, it's like, Cersei walking down the streets and everyone going, shame, shame, shame. Yeah. If that's the worst that can happen to a house that has laid such devastation, in so many different ways over the years, our bias is, we have a very interesting bias because we come from a different time about what it means to be a religious extremist. But in that system,
but I don't know. Absolutely. Basically, George wrote a book about bad guys and worse guys. And one of the things about it is, look who you're rooting for. People,
Yeah.
Okay, Daenerys Stormborn, my gal, who just torched an entire city and sank a fleet and killed. Oh, we're sorry about the collateral damage of the civilians who happened to be in the city when the dragons strafed and all. There's not one person in that story that we care about who hasn't at some time or another been an absolute murderous jerk. And yet George pulls it off with his storytelling skills. But you're 100% right about the anachronistic qualities. I got a letter from, or not a letter, but email from I'm at the point now where I have 4 editors, 2 in London and 2 in New York. And I sent them the first 5 chapters of the new book, and one of them said, gee, what do you think about taking one of those 2 guys and making him a girl, because we don't have a really powerful female character in the first 5 chapters. They're all wives and barmaids. I almost lost my mind, and if I hadn't been friends with this editor for 20 years, I probably would have been throwing things across the room. It's like, woman, I'm the guy who created Mara of the Acoma. I'm the guy who gave you Miranda and Sandrina. I know how to write a powerful female character who isn't a chick in chainmail bikini or a guy in drag, But look at the cultures I'm writing in. These are incredibly male-dominated, sexist cultures. And for a woman to exert herself and shine has to be convincing. It has to fit within the internal logic. Cersei's the way she is because she's a manipulative, crazy bitch, but she's never sat on the throne.
Yeah.
She's never been the person in charge. Look at senior moment, jet lag just kicked my ass. The Avengers with
Black Widow
and the gal.
Black Widow.
Huh?
Black Widow in the Avengers?
No, I'm talking about with Patrick McNee and.
Oh, Patrick McNee and it's the duo. It was the duo that.
Anyway, she's playing the grandma from Dornish or whatever it is, and again, she's the matriarch, but she's manipulating the hell out of everybody else, because that's what she's permitted to do in that culture.
Yeah.
She's not going to grab a sword and start cutting heads. And it really is annoying, I speak for myself only, to start getting criticism when somebody starts laying on modern contemporary standards. I had to peel Janie Wirtz off the ceiling one day when she called me, because, Janie does things that I just absolutely refuse to do, like reads fan blogs of criticism. No! Don't believe your critics, because if you believe the good ones, then you got to believe the bad ones too. But somebody talked about the Empire series and was doing a really deep analysis. But the thing that made Janie pissed was when I created the character of Kevin, this critic just like a month or 2 ago said, oh, well, and now Feist and Wirtz introduced the rape culture. And Janie went ballistic. And I had to take an hour on the phone to convince her not to write a response. When idiots write shit like that, all you do is crickets. Because not only is that a modern thing, the guy is not that guy. He's not the male rape culture. He's just a guy who's got a different way of looking at things than the other characters. But yeah, we run into that all the time.
Yeah. There was, I think we're talking Emma Peel, the character of Emma Peel, Diana Rigg.
Oh yeah, Diana Rigg. Yeah.
Diana Rigg.
Who you look at Grandma now, and you just have to go back and realize just what an amazingly smoking woman she was in the '60s.
So yeah, shameless plug. That answer was brought to us by Always on Wi-Fi. Anyway, shameless, totally shameless. Fred's point earlier, the shift from the just straight binary good, bad to there's a range here that we need to be talking about, and this is what Game of Thrones is, that there's varying degrees of bad all the way through. We had a panel on Friday talking about the morals and ethics, the ideas of utilitarianism, that how do you make your decisions based on what's happening in the world that is not always cut and dried. There's much more of a prevalence of those sorts of things. Is that because there's a change in a willingness to accept that the world isn't just shiny good guy, mustache twiddling bad guy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just coming back to the topic of the talk.
No, we've moved on.
But just coming back to it, is that we're living in an increasingly politically sensitive. People are, political correctness is kind of the new totalitarianism, really. And it's reaching points, and Stephen Fry comes out and says, just because you're offended doesn't mean you're right. And stuff like that. What makes speculative fiction powerful is that it's a playground, it's a toolkit that you have with extra special tools to get to say the things that you want to say in whatever way you want without actually labeling anything. I mean, so, what was the first interracial moment on screen was Star Trek, right? But they did it as interspecial, right?
Right, and,
so
they did it against their will. Yeah.
They did it against the will, and there's a lot of, no matter what you feel, no matter what you believe, there's speculative fiction just allows so much room to play around with that in a kind of within safe-ish parameters.
Well, it lets you act stuff out. I mean, it's like, okay, people think Ramsay Bolton was the most murderous bad guy in the show only because Joffrey's been gone for a while. At that level, comparing those two guys is just, as to which is crazier is, like, do you like fish or do you like salmon or trout? I mean, they're both fish. But the point is, it allows us to see in real time just how crazy those two guys were.
You know what would have been great? Yeah. Instead of Jon Snow and Sansa versus, the Battle of the Bastards versus Ramsay, would you have a situation in which a character like Joffrey would be against Ramsay, because that would really open it up, and you'd be like, okay, I have no idea how I'm going to feel about this until it plays out.
Well, a sports analogy: you have football teams that you hate both of them, and you're going, can I root for a 0-0 tie?
Or for them to take each other out. Yeah, Joffrey taking out Ramsay.
But they're credible examples of like just in terms of ideas, and we're talking about feminism. Possibly the most truly feminist character in the last few decades has been.
You're going to bring that topic up with less than 2 minutes to go.
I'm going to bring it up quickly, but Ripley from Aliens.
Oh yeah,
right.
Sure.
Ripley from Aliens, fantastic. Now put her against characters like Thelma and Louise, right? Thelma and Louise are not true feminist characters because, give some girls some guns, have them act like men. That's not feminism, right?
Exactly. Chicks in chainmail and guys in drag.
However, Ripley
is
running around in a spaceship, killing aliens, is a far more feminist character. And that's the power of, that's the kind of room that you have when you've got speculative fiction.
No,
even the first film was essentially about a male's fears regarding pregnancy, really, followed by a sequel about feminism.
So it wasn't a thing just coming out of my stomach. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is that there's a lot going on in speculative fiction beneath the surface, and it should be more kind of understood and accepted and appreciated and engaged upon by the mainstream audience.
I guess the answer to your question is speculative fiction is on the rise because people like that stuff.
Yeah.
Because people. There we go. We've spent 50 minutes to come up to they like it.
No, they like it.
And I think we're done. Right, cool.
Is that it?
That's pretty much it, yeah. That was Raymond E. Feist and Fred Strydom talking about the rise of speculative fiction, which, you've just received your answer. Coming to you live from Icon 2016 Gallagher Convention Center. We're here all day. A day pass will get you $100 in an amazing array of events, including more panel presentations this afternoon. We've got a workshop space with panel presentations as well. Convention has been powered by always on Wi-Fi, super fast Wi-Fi. We'd like to thank Laurie Park Zoo also for our little star earlier on my shoulder. So thank you very much to Laurie Park. Please check out their website, lauriepark.co.za. We will be back in 10 minutes where we'll be talking about Zombie ZA, the handbook for the recently infected and how to navigate South Africa in your newly zombified state. That'll be with the author Lee Herman. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much to our panelists, Fred Strydom and Raymond E. Feist.